Hello and welcome to Freedom from Fear, a German New Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Newberry.
And I'm your other host, Abigail Puccioni. Please be aware that nothing discussed here on this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
Consult your trusted professionals and your own inner knowing before making any health decisions. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Freedom from Fear. Today, we are going to discuss the topic of acne and the biological conflicts that are behind this symptom, which is a feeling attacked or a feeling soiled program, and it affects the corium skin. Abigail is going to talk more about that in a minute. And yeah, we'll be sharing some stories, sharing exactly what's happening in the layers of the skin, and lots of ways to help yourself resolve this if you're struggling with this, or one of your children, or if you're a teenager listening, because that is a prime time for this conflict to rear its head.
So one of the other things that I want to point out real quick before we dive into acne specifically is the difference between a separation conflict and an attack conflict. So a lot of times people, when we talk about just skin issues generically, they'll kind of get grouped in together. And so people can become a little confused and think that, oh, acne is a separation conflict. It's related to a separation conflict because skin issues are mostly related to some sort of separation conflict. So the difference here is that we have the epidermal layer of the skin, which is ectodermal tissue. And then acne specifically is going to be a bit of a deeper layer in the skin, which, as Ashley said, we call the corium skin. So it's a deeper layer of the skin. It's not the epidermal, like the outermost layer, but rather it's a little deeper. And that's where what we know as acne comes from, is the corium skin layer, which is an old mesodermal program. So when we talk about all the different tissue layers in GNM, and this is important because of the map of adaptation. And so we know that new mesodermal tissues and then old mesodermal tissues, those adapt differently. It's different than the endoderm and the ectoderm. They each have a different pattern. And you know, all these different SBSs, they follow a very predictable pattern of adaptation. And your way of like knowing what the adaptation pattern is going to be is knowing the tissue layer. So when we talk about acne, this is an old mesodermal program. And the specific SBS that we're talking about, or special biological program, it's just another way of saying basically the type of program or adaptation that we're talking about in relation to the part of the body that's being affected. In this case is the corium skin, which, like I said just a minute ago, it's a deeper layer than the epidermis. So again, this is made up of old mesodermal tissue, and the underlying type of conflict, as Ashley said, is a feeling attacked or feeling soiled conflict. And depending on the intensity of this conflict, acne can range anywhere from being, you know, small, little minor pimples to a really severe and often painful skin condition. So during the conflict active phase of this program, the skin might appear a little bumpy. And this would be like, if you think about people who have, you know, acne and struggle with that, they can kind of like feel it coming on, right? Like you can feel a large like cystic pimple kind of like coming up under the skin. So when you might feel that is when you would be in the conflict active phase. Other than that, you won't really have any other symptoms. And if it's a very minor adaptation, you might not even notice that at all for something like a very tiny pimple. But then in the healing phase, which is when we have cell breakdown, so whatever cells grew in the conflict active phase, we're now going to have breakdown of those cells, and that's going to be assisted with bacteria. And this is when you would see what we think of as a pimple. So this is when there's inflammation with swelling, redness, and then the pus due to the involvement of bacteria, of course. And that bacteria is used to aid in the repair of that tissue in order to help break down those extra cells that are no longer needed. So, in this case, the bacteria is not the cause of acne, it's
Hmm.
rather part of the body's intelligent healing process. So this is, of course, why, antibacterial face washes or different types of medication can obviously seem to help acne, at least in the short term. But then when the, special face wash or, fancy creams or whatever, or medication is discontinued, then the acne will often come back full force.
Yep.
So it's because it's essentially taking the body out of the healing phase and keeping it in a state of what we call sympathetic atonia. So it's kind of like just putting it back into more of a conflict active phase. Or rather, it's not allowing the healing phase to finish out and to properly complete and for the tissue restoration to finish out and for the tissue to be restored to normal, right? So with this program, then the biological purpose, which I think is the most important thing to highlight with any SBS that we talk about, right? Why does the body do this? Why does this adaptation make biological sense? And this is going to be to provide a protective layer or a thicker skin against further attacks or future
Yep.
attacks. In this case, we would think of that little pimple or the large pimple as being a shield. So it's kind of your body creating this little extra barrier of defense for you to try to help you out. And again, keep in mind that this is a very primal perspective. So anyway, Ashley is going to share her own personal resolution story with this program with acne, which I think is a great way to show how this adaptation looks in real life and how you can go about resolving it.
Yeah. So one analogy I wanted to share just before I get into more of my story about what happens in that layer of skin when you have that conflict active and then you go into resolution. So an analogy I always use is like in medieval times when they were going to war, they would have those literal metal shields so that like the sword couldn't pierce them and they wouldn't get injured or die. And so when you're conflict active of that feeling soiled, feeling attacked program, you have those extra layers of skin to protect you from further attacks, right? And if you think about that metal shield up, like that's protecting you from a sword trying to, injure you or cut you or kill you. Um, and that's kind of what your skin is doing. And so then once you resolve it, then you don't need those further layer of skin cells or like this skin shield to protect you because you've resolved it and you're no longer being attacked anymore. And it doesn't even have to be a physical attack. Um, but because that's how the body is biologically responding, then that is what happens in the conflict active phase. And then once you resolve it, like Abigail was saying, then that's when the acne shows up. And like many of the other special biological programs, the symptoms are occurring after you resolve something. And so the acne is already the resolution. You've already resolved the conflict. But what's challenging, and I'll share this more when I share more of my story, is that then the symptom itself, in this case acne, becomes another track or trigger for then, oh, you feel dirty, you feel soiled, you feel gross. And then that starts to cycle over again. And then you build up more skin cells because you feel dirty, you feel gross, or you're popping your own pimples, which that is an attack conflict right there because you're literally trying to force out the bacteria that's there to help you restore your skin. And so when you're popping your pimples, you're giving yourself another attack conflict. And I've had this many times where before I knew German New Medicine, and I was popping my pimples and I would notice that, okay, I like pop one on my chin. And then literally the next day or in a few days, like there would be several almost exactly where the one I just popped was before. because I'm sure in that specific area, then my body was like, oh, we're being attacked right now. So like we
Yeah.
got to build up those skin cells again. And then it's like it perpetuates that cycle. And so my story specifically, which is just really interesting because I tried everything. I tried antibiotics, I tried diet changes, I tried supplements, I tried fancy skincares or like stuff that bleached all my sheets and towels, and
Mm.
that was not super fun. And nothing really worked. Like I had acne on my face, my neck, my chest, the tops of my shoulders, my back, like, and
Mm.
it was really bad. Basically, I did everything except Accutane, um, because my mom wouldn't let me. So I'm grateful that I didn't do it. But I was wanting it to be gone so bad that I was willing to go very far to, quote, get rid of my acne,
Sure.
not realizing, what the root cause was at the time. I was on birth control for a while to help with that as well. And but yeah, nothing really worked long term because I wasn't getting to that underlying feeling soiled, feeling attacked conflict. I'm just trying to, basically symptom management. And, I didn't know. And I didn't resolve it actually fully until learning German New Medicine. And I I didn't change any of my diet. I wasn't on supplements. I wasn't on medications. I wasn't on antibiotics. Like the main thing I did to resolve it was pattern recognition and awareness of, oh my gosh, how often in my daily life do I feel attacked? Do I feel dirty? Do I feel gross about every single thing? Like, I am sure I had dozens of tracks around seeing my skin, around things touching my face, touching my skin. And my skincare routine was quite neurotic. I was like washing my hands in between everything, even if it was like I had put soap on my face, then I needed to like wash my hands again before touching my face.
Wow.
And um and it was really challenging because with any kind of skin condition, especially with acne, a lot of people in my life were trying to share their like, oh, skin tips. And I used to work at a nursing home as well. And, I'm taking people to go to the bathroom that can't walk by themselves because they have a lot of, physical issues. And yet they're trying to tell me what I should do with my skin. And it was just like this one particular resident who was very sweet. She's kind of like a nervous, anxious woman, but she literally every time I interacted with her, she had to tell me something. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, I see how unhelpful this was because my perception was I'm a person that easily feels attacked by everything, right? I didn't know that in those moments, but
Sure.
so someone saying, uh, this is what you should do for your skin, or like, oh, why don't you wear more makeup, or whatever they're saying to me, then that is another opportunity to feel attacked and
Sure.
feel bad about my skin. And everyone can see my issue. And many people made comments. And um, it was really challenging. And so working through that, and I actually worked with a German New Medicine coach to work through those tracks. And I had to hold the vision of having clear skin long before it resolved fully. Like it took about 6 or 7 months of daily, like I felt like a crazy person at times because I'm like, okay, I'm seeing small changes. And I also took pictures. Um, I didn't really want to, but now I'm glad I have them because to look at them now, I'm just like, wow, like I don't know who that person is. Like she gone. Like and it's like that was helpful to see the progress because it wasn't an overnight thing. It wasn't. And it took a while and it was hard because you're seeing your skin every day, you're seeing your face in the mirror. And it was hard to see that there was any change at all. So having those pictures or have something to kind of like mm, kind of like measure my rate of resolution was helpful just for me personally. And I never thought that I would be sharing these pictures because I was pretty ashamed of my skin. And when I was still living in my parents' house, I wouldn't even leave my room without putting makeup on because also my family was a big track for yeah, feeling attacked, and they would make comments as well. And so I didn't even really feel safe in my home to not wear makeup or to not feel like it's not safe for me to show my skin because then I'm there's more opportunities for attack conflicts.
Sure.
And so that was really challenging too. And I've had a lot of clearing conversations with certain family members now and just like sharing, hey, like this was really hard. And also, I've become a person now that, I mean, even doing this podcast or being an entrepreneur, that German New Medicine, as any of you guys who are new or, old to German New Medicine, like it's very controversial. And
Yeah.
putting yourself out there in this way where people aren't necessarily going to agree with you, like you have to be able to withstand that and then not take it personally, right?
Yeah.
And so a big thing for me in becoming a coach and becoming someone who works with clients and is on video calls and putting myself out there, on social media, like I would not have felt comfortable doing that before like resolving the acne program because I also in this process have become someone who doesn't feel attacked by life, by everything, by people, by people's
Mm.
comments, by if someone doesn't like what I have to say, like yes, it's human nature to like care somewhat about other people. Like we're not meant to just be on our own and just, you know, not care about anything. But I see now looking back how much my people pleasing or needing to be someone or a certain version of myself or someone else set me up for this conflict.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just wild because I look at these old pictures and I'm just like, I don't know who that is. Like it's crazy. So, I think for anyone listening that's been struggling with this, like resolution is possible. And I had acne for over 13 years. Like it was a long time and very discouraging. I think there was a lot of self-devaluation kind of mixed in, feeling bad about feeling bad. And um yeah.
So you said, of course, it's not an overnight thing, right? And I think a lot of people tend to have this misconception about GNM that, oh, once I know the type of underlying conflict that's linked to acne, which is, feeling attacked, feeling soiled, well, then poof, it should be gone, like, oh, now I know the kind of conflict and that's that. And that's not how it works. I would say 9 times out of 10. It's not going to be this huge, like, and it could be this huge light bulb moment, right? Of you, see, oh, wow, this is all about feeling attacked and feeling soiled. Where, how am I attacking myself or feeling attacked by others in my life or feeling soiled? How do I feel dirtied and gross, that sort of thing? Like, you can ask yourself some of these questions, and some people will have this huge moment of realization where they're like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm doing. And that will be a
Yeah.
profound enough perception shift for them that it could indeed resolve the program, right? But because I know people might want to know from the time that you discovered GNM and realized, the type of conflict related to acne, how long did it take you to actually resolve that program? Because I know you had acne for 13 years, which is, significant. So then after discovering GNM, how long did it take for that program to resolve?
Well, it wasn't actually until I started working with a coach that it started getting better. So
Right.
on my own, just like learning it, um, I mean, my awareness was improving, but I had a lot of tracks. So I mean, touching my face was a track, having anything touch my face that was unexpected, even like eating certain foods, where like something would squirt out randomly or like touch my
Mm,
face, or like pizza sauce or like burgers or tacos where it's just like, just very
gross.
messy to eat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah.
I love food and I love eating messy food, and I couldn't care less now. Like it doesn't matter to me. But it was that unexpected part. So if I was prepared for it,
Yeah.
um, I was fine, even if something touched my face. But actually, I have a funny story. So I do acro yoga, partner yoga, and when I was living in Seattle, we would go to this one park and meet up with friends to do acro yoga on Sunday afternoons. And I met up with some friends that don't do acro like a little bit before the actual like acro jam. And one of my friends who is not the most self-aware person, um, he for some reason that day, so I have a birthmark on the left side of my chin, and he thought it was like I had chocolate on my face, and so we're not that close.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so without any warning, he licks his thumb and then tries to
Oh
rub the
no.
chocolate off my face. And we're
Oh no.
friends. We're not dating. We're not like, I mean, I wouldn't really let anyone do that to me. Um, and I was very shocked. It was definitely like a DHS moment. I was caught off guard. I was like, what the heck are you doing? I'm like, why are you touching my face? And it was just like, okay, like, and he's like, oh, I thought there was chocolate on your face. I was like, this is permanent. This is a birthmark. I was like, this doesn't rub off. And I I was just so like appalled that someone would do that to me without my
Yeah.
consent, without warning, without, and there wasn't food on my face. It's
Right.
permanent. It lives there. Like it's a birthmark. And literally the next day I developed like a huge pimple like right where he had touched me. And it was
Wow.
hilarious, right? Because I already knew German new medicine. I've already pretty much resolved the acne program. And I was like, wow, this is nuts, because yeah, this fit all the criteria for a new conflict shock. And I was like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And like it's okay, And I was like, okay, this is crazy and it makes perfect sense. Um and for me, before that specific incident, or like when I have a pimple here and there now, I usually know what it is. But when I was first working on resolving it, I didn't like, there was so many tracks, and just my perspective and my personality was just set up to be someone who felt dirty and felt attacked all the time,
Mm.
that I
Yeah.
didn't even necessarily know what my tracks were, because there was just so many. And I kind of had this lens, or I was living my life through this lens of attack me. So then I'm attracting people and relationships and things where then I feel attacked. And I was using, not consciously, but I was using everything as an opportunity to feel dirty, feel attacked. Um and I know for me personally, I have a personal history of, I had some sexual abuse when I was a teenager. and I grew up in religion. And so um, those two things, along with then being someone who was primed for these types of conflicts, I know that sex was also a big track for me because even when I was having sex with someone I was dating, I still felt dirty and gross and like, oh, it's like wrong because of religion. Um,
Sure.
and then my personal history of what had happened to me. And so that was a huge track for me. And I think part of why it lasted into my 20s, because for many people, acne tends to be, in their teenage years type of conflict. And then you kind of
Sure.
grow out of it, per se. And so, that was a big thing for me too, to work through was like, okay, just because I've been through this trauma and this thing has happened to me doesn't mean that I'm broken as a person or I'm dirty as a person or like because I felt this was my internal story for many years was like I'm unclean as a person.
Yeah.
Um and I think I don't know if this is just like a biblical thing, but like back in the day before, modern medicine and everything, and like when people would have leprosy, which I don't know what conflict that is, it's probably separation or something, and multiple things. But anyway, they would
Yeah.
have to shout, unclean, unclean, when
Right.
they would go
I
to
think it
like,
is separation, by
yeah,
the way. Yeah.
they would have to shout that. And not that I was doing that in my life, but I feel
Yeah.
like because that was internally my story, I was broadcasting that, even though I'm not shouting to everyone like unclean, unclean. Like that would be pretty weird. Um, but because that was my internal dialogue, that was perpetuating the acne and perpetuating then situations and circumstances to feel dirty, to feel gross. And and so like looking back, I'm like, this makes perfect sense that this was a pretty big issue for me for a long time. And as I
Oh,
started to shift, what?
real quick, leprosy is actually linked to attack conflicts, feeling
Oh,
soil
that's,
conflicts.
oh
I
my
was wrong.
God.
It is the slightly, it's the corium
Ha!
skin, so the deeper layer of the skin. So it is not separation, it's attack. So spot on
Which
with
is even funnier.
everything you're saying. Yeah.
Which is even funnier because then you're perpetuating it by you having to shout unclean. Then
Yeah. I'm unclean. I'm unclean. Yeah. Oh, totally.
that's hilarious. And and yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And so thanks for looking that up, by the way.
Yeah. Just like looked up
It's
on my
like
phone real
I was
quick.
like, now I'm super curious.
I was like, what is leprosy? I mean, that's not something that we would talk about a lot today as far as, a common chronic symptom, right? Because it's been renamed. And that's a really common phenomena in the medical world is that something that
Yep.
used to have the name, of leprosy, now we would diagnose it as like something else typically,
Yeah.
depending on, of course, level of severity and all that. But it's an old mesodermal program that's affecting the corium skin.
Yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah. So you also mentioned a little bit ago something about like hormones and how this is typically a thing that happens in teenage years. So I just wanted to touch on the very conventional and also holistic theory that acne is related to hormonal changes or hormonal imbalances, right? It's also sometimes linked to like gut health and all sorts of things that people try to connect it to as far as the root cause. But think about how not every teenager, dealing with these fluctuating hormones has acne, right? And
Hmm.
also some adults have acne, like you had it into your, well into your adult years. So acne also most commonly appears on the face. Also, particularly in puberty, since teenagers are, of course, much more vulnerable when it comes to their appearance and their looks. So, feeling for a teenager feeling unattractive or that they're not good looking, particularly when it comes to attracting the opposite gender, right? This can
Yep.
easily be lead to acne, and this is why the most common occurrence for your typical acne is going to be teenagers going through puberty who are for the first time very concerned about their appearance and, attracting a mate. And there's a very biological, reason behind that, of course. So, in addition, the teenage years are the time when there are more, verbal kind of confrontations, right, with the parents, teachers, other authorities in their life. And then usually it's just the acne itself, like the pimples popping up, like feeling
Yep.
soiled in terms of your appearance, that causes this to be a very reoccurring conflict. So it's not even just like a hanging healing where the healing phase keeps getting interrupted. It's often an actual reoccurring conflict in which you are completing the healing phase. So you do have that pimple, and then, eventually goes away, and it's the resolution of that particular feeling attacked or soiled conflict. But then you have a new DHS, a new program that starts running, or I guess the same program, but in terms of
Yeah.
a new conflict shock, based on the appearance of that pimple, which was the healing phase of another conflict shock. So you can
Yep.
see how this can easily be a very cyclical thing, which is why it can be a really tough program to resolve because of this cyclical nature. So, imagine a teenager that has this initial pimple from resolving a feeling soiled or feeling attack conflict. Perhaps this was from something that a peer said to them, and then they eventually forgot about it or came to peace with it. Or maybe they resolved it through another peer giving them a really nice compliment. Who knows? But then when they have the symptom of the healing phase, the, nasty, gross pimple, and then that's a brand new opportunity to experience then another feeling soiled or feeling attacked conflict. Think about the thoughts going on like, ooh, gross. No boy or no girl is going to want to go out with me now, and thus the nasty cycle begins. So
Mm-hmm.
again, most cases of acne are actually really great examples of what we would call in GNM a reoccurring conflict.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk about too in the teenage years. So for girls going through puberty, depending on what their stories or what they've been taught about their period or just blood,
Oh, yeah.
that can also be a huge track for the feeling soiled, right? Because
Totally.
it's smelly. It can be, a lot to deal with as a young woman, a young girl. And what is your relationship to starting your period, to having a period?
Right.
The story from your mom, from your grandma, and then what kind of sex ed or puberty videos did you have to watch in school, and
Yeah.
like how was that interpreted for you?
Right. Did it
And
gross you out? Did you
yeah,
feel soiled in terms of it? Yeah.
and I know for me, and we just talked about this on the last podcast, but um I started my period at age 11, and which is the actually like biological age to start your period. um but I was early compared to my peers. I was the only one in my class that had my period, and I know that alone made me feel weird and a little, not fully ostracized, but I always felt like when I was on my period that everyone knew and everyone was like looking at me, or they could like smell me or something. And being in fifth grade, like, and being the first one in my class, um and that I didn't have acne really in fifth grade yet. But I know that also, even though that's the normal biological age to start your period, when most of my peers hadn't started theirs yet, and I was the only one, and I knew I was the only one,
Yeah.
because there was some class we had to go to, like all the boys and the girls got separated, and they weren't like, oh, raise your hand if you started your period, but like, um but there was something like that where like somehow I just knew I was the only one. And in my friend group we would talk about it, and so they would ask me all these like questions, and like oh, like, how's your experience been? I mean, they're not asking them like that because we're all kids, but, um, and, they'd be like, oh, like, I never want to start my period. That's so gross. Or, just like, just these, innocent comments. But then based on everything and how I felt, like, then that set me up to have the initial pimples, I'm sure. And then, like Abigail was saying, it like it becomes this recurring conflict because then if you don't know the biological laws and understand that acne actually is the resolution symptom, then you just feel worse, right? And I had seen many dermatologists, right? And they're all like examining my skin like up close and personal and like getting in my face and like taking samples and like, oh my gosh, like that was awful as a teenager. And it it made me feel like, okay, well, nothing's working, so that means like there's something wrong with that, maybe this will never go away. And actually, shortly after discovering German medicine and learning more about it, a big part of my personal resolution, or my ability to see that resolution was possible, was if I have acne the rest of my life, I'm going to be fine. Like, I just let go of, I need to fix this.
Yeah.
Something is wrong. Like I was just like, you know what?
Mhm.
It's fine. It's manageable. It's okay. It's not my favorite thing, but I'm okay. And that actually set me up to be able to see more of the patterns and to be able to shift and to change, was when I let go and wasn't so focused on, there's something wrong with me that I have to fix and nothing is working and I don't know what to do. Because that was my internal
Yeah.
story for a long time.
And I think that applies to so many different symptoms that people are trying to get rid of. And I know we won't get too into this because we do want to do another episode about this, specifically about resolving really any sort of SBS. But going back to what you said earlier about popping pimples and
Oh yeah.
how the actual like popping of it can be perceived obviously by the psyche as literally like physically attacking your own skin. I mean, sometimes
Yep.
it like bleeds, it hurts, like that can be painful, like
Mhm.
I've done that before, pimples here and there, like popping it, it's painful. And so of course it can be perceived as a physical attack conflict in the face, but also think about what's going on perception wise. Okay, like what is even leading you? Like what are the thoughts and beliefs and the overall perception, state of the psyche that's even leading you to take that physical action, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just the physical attack; it's primarily that perceptual attack, right? Of the why do you feel the need to pop the pimple and get rid of it? And then that will tell you a whole lot about what's going on in your psyche, because if it's like, well, I have school pictures tomorrow and I need to get rid of the pimple because ew, gross, other people will think I'm dirty, unclean, or they'll think I'm unattractive, right? So all of those thoughts and beliefs that are even setting you up to take the action of the
Mhm.
little physical attack. I mean, it's primarily perceptual.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about verbal attacks. So
Yeah.
with this conflict, most of the time we're not getting physically attacked, right? I mean, even what you just shared about popping the pimples, yes, that is a physical attack. And the point of this biological program is to protect you from said attack, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
um, in your head, you're popping your pimples, or words. And so, when you have a fight with your partner that's unexpected, do you notice after you make up with your partner that you have some pimples that pop up after you've had a big fight, and if this is a conflict that gets activated for you a lot, if this is recurring for you, like, what are your thoughts and beliefs when interacting with people and when people are upset with you? Do you interpret or use those situations as opportunities to feel attacked, to feel soiled? And how can you then set your psyche up to not interpret it that way, and
Mhm.
to shift your perception that you can have an argument or disagreement, and it doesn't have to be a personal attack? Because and I'm not saying that you can prevent a conflict shock, but because you can't. Like, it's unexpected. Your psyche's not ready. But there are ways that you can set your perception, like you can set yourself up for success with how you're perceiving things. And also, as you start to resolve this, you become a person that doesn't feel attacked by everything. And so then you're not also attracting those types of things nearly as often, because you're not in your head saying, attack me or unclean, unclean,
Mhm.
And so then when you're just more at peace with yourself and your skin, people don't bother you. And literally, I've taken screenshots. This has been like more in the last year. Um, but one of my mantras or things that I would like repeat to myself is, I have radiant glowing skin, right? And this was way before I did, right? it
Yeah.
took
Yeah.
me months. Yeah, it took over 6 months. I don't remember if it was 7 or 8. I just remember it was over 6 months to like fully resolve it. And now it's funny because having my own business and being on social media and being on videos a lot, um, people are seeing me talk, right? Seeing my talking head online. And so I've literally had people now reflect back to me what I wanted for myself for so long. And it's really cool and interesting. So I'm like, huh. Like literally a few weeks ago, or when we did one of our last podcasts and I talked on my story afterwards, I'm actually wearing the same shirt. I guess people like when I wear pink. but um but literally I had several people, they were like, "Oh, you're glowing." And I was, this is hilarious, because I know that was, I wanted that for so long. And
Yeah.
because now my skin, like I look at myself now and I'm just like, and nobody would ever guess that I ever had any acne.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because now that I no longer need that from other people, it just is. People are reflecting that back to me. And it's really cool because I'm not perpetuating that story of, there's something wrong with me, I need to fix this, don't look at me. Like, even I was just sharing this on another podcast that I was interviewed on a couple weeks ago. I was in like all the musics in junior high and high school. And I remember in choir, I wouldn't even try out for solos, even though I knew I could sing it, because I didn't want everyone looking at me, because I felt like my skin was
Yeah.
so bad that I'm like, no, I won't try out for this. And my choir teacher, like, he would encourage me to try out for things, but I'm like, I was just like, I don't want to be front and center, because that means everyone's going to be looking at me.
Yeah.
And then I felt like, and I didn't have this clear of a, pattern or thought at that moment, and especially in high school, but it was like, that was too scary for my psyche, because it's like, okay, I'm setting myself up to be in this very vulnerable state, but I'm by myself, I'm away from the pack of the choir, and this is where I get attacked. And so I wouldn't try out for solos. Not all the time, but like most of for like the big concerts where like you go up in the front of the stage and everyone like on the risers like sits down and all the lights are all on you. I wouldn't
Mhm.
do it, because I was like, I didn't feel safe enough to kind of put myself on display to then be attacked. And I knew
Sure.
that, not as clearly as I'm sharing it right now, but I knew myself well enough that then I just wouldn't try out for them because I was like, I don't think I could handle if I was attacked, whether it was because of my skin or I messed up singing the wrong thing because I was
Sure.
so nervous about being attacked or,
But then you
um
wonder why your skin's making all these little tiny shields to protect you, right?
yeah, exactly, exactly. Um yeah, it's so interesting looking back now because I have much more compassion for myself and also then the people in my life that have acne or if I see people out, I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm not going to go up to someone randomly and be like, oh, you need to do this to fix your skin. Like,
Right.
I would never do anything to anyone, especially because I have the personal experience of going through that. Um, I remember that happening to me even in the grocery store. People would just come up to me, complete strangers, and I'm like, why are you talking to me? Like,
Wow.
but again, that internal antenna, that internal story was me shouting almost, unclean, unclean, or like attack me. And so it's like, and people are sensing that on this subtle level, even though I'm not obviously saying that, although that would be pretty funny um to do that in a grocery store. But yeah, so one other thing I wanted to cover is small pimples versus large pimples. So you talked a little bit about it, but I just want to get into it a little bit more. So when you have a long time where you're conflict active or a big conflict shock, like what I shared earlier with my friend that licked his thumb and then tried to wipe off my birthmark. I had a huge pimple the next day. Like for a one-time thing, it was pretty big because I was very shocked and very irritated and what the heck?
Yeah.
Um, but when you're noticing that you're having like these deeper, really painful pimples that last for a long time, or like you can kind of feel them under the surface of your skin, that usually means that you've been conflict active for a lot longer and it's taking you longer to resolve it. And so then the healing symptom is more intense, can be more inflamed, more painful, more red, swollen. And when you're seeing small pimples, that is an indication that either you resolved it quickly or the conflict shock was smaller. And so then the adaptation was smaller. It's similar to, and we're not going to get into this a ton today, or really at all, but just as another example, like stage 1 cancer versus stage 4. So, like, stage 4 means that you've been conflict active for longer. And so then the healing symptoms are more intense than like a stage 1. And so I kind of use these terms with some of my skin clients, like a stage 1 pimple versus like a stage 4 pimple. Um, and and so like if you're noticing it coming up, like how can you get to peace or resolution more quickly or more easily so that if you do have that conflict shock of feeling attacked or feeling soiled, that you resolve it more quickly so then any acne that you do have is just like little ones and it's not as painful and it's more manageable. And and then like how can you be okay with the fact that, oh, I had another pimple? And even celebrating the fact that, okay, here's another one. Like, and using those opportunities when you see them pop up as, oh, I guess I felt soiled or attacked, but before the pimple happened, right?
Right.
Um,
And the process you're
and
talking about there is basically just downgrading. So, like
yeah,
when
exactly.
you're in the conflict active state with this adaptation, the sooner that you can start to downgrade that conflict, even if you're still dealing with it, then, as Ashley was saying, you'd have more of a stage 1 pimple versus a stage 4, right? And I think another really easy way to put this, to sum up everything you just said, is to think of this as an equation. So when we talk about conflict load, that's a combination of the conflict intensity and then the duration of the
Yep.
conflict. So something that will increase or decrease your conflict load, we're going to be looking at, okay, how long were you in the conflict active state? And then how intense was it? How intense was that initial conflict shock? And so that's why for Ashley, when she had that, rather large pimple come up after that guy, like, licked his thumb and then tried to wipe off her birthmark on her face, that was what we would call a more intense conflict, even though it was a really short duration. Um,
Yeah.
so also I have a story about just a one-time thing that happened. My husband was like massaging my back, and for those that don't know, I have a long history with different low back adaptations, let's say. And so it's a part of my body that naturally my psyche is more protective of that area of my body. If he was massaging like my arm or my leg, it would probably have been no big deal. Like I probably would not have experienced a conflict shock, but he was
Mm,
kind of massaging my back, and he pressed too hard, accidentally, of course, on like right kind of beside my spine and my low back. And it kind of hurt, like it kind of caught me off guard. And it wasn't really that it was so painful. It was more that based on my history of low back adaptations, my psyche was very protective of that area of my body. And it was
mm,
like, don't touch me there, And so I literally had that reaction that, don't touch me there. Like, I think I literally said that to him. And he's like, oh, like, sorry, and then he, lightened up. Well, the next morning, I had a massive pimple in that exact spot on my back. And this was, I don't know, less than a year ago. And I knew GNM, of course. And so I kind of laughed and I was like, oh my gosh, like this makes perfect sense. Because of course I resolved that pretty quickly, right? Like
yeah.
after, he lightened up and, stopped massaging me, forgot about it, went to bed, like it was resolved, right? It was, done and over. And then the next morning I had this massive kind of almost like a cystic pimple pop up under the back. So it was the same thing in that moment because of how much my psyche, was guarding my low back due to a history of previous adaptations. That was a really big, more intense conflict for me, even
Mm,
though the duration was extremely short, right?
yeah.
Maybe I was in conflict active for less than a minute, right? But the conflict intensity was greater. So therefore my conflict load was still great enough to give me a pretty sizable pimple that popped up the next day.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. Have you had to have this experience like again, or has this been like a more one-off? I know this is not something that you deal with often.
No, that was more of a one-off thing. Normally, this is not one of my go-to programs or
One of your
adaptations,
pet
right?
conflicts.
Yeah, no. So it's very abnormal for me to experience this conflict. But in that situation, I did, and sometimes I would say maybe once every few months, I'll have like a little tiny pimple pop up, maybe somewhere on my face, right? Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Oh, I wanted to share another thing. So I was mentioning that I do acro yoga. And so for anyone that doesn't know, acro yoga is like acrobatic yoga. It usually involves two people. It can involve more at one time, but for most acro yoga poses or flows, it's two people. And so people's feet are touching you in weird places that on a day-to-day basis they wouldn't normally be touching you. And or people's hands are sweaty, or like it's just
Gross.
there's
Or
a lot
you
of
perceive it as
opportunity
gross.
for this
Yeah.
conflict to come up. And for a while, even after I had basically resolved the majority of this conflict and didn't really have breakouts that often or pimples that often, um when I was first starting to do acro in Seattle, I had to kind of like I don't know, hype myself up before I would go to a jam or a class. And I remember I would sit in my car for like 1 to 2 minutes and be like, oh, it's safe for people's feet to touch me. It's
Mm.
safe to be touched, like, or hands are in weird places. But for me, it was mostly about feet. Because one of the like intermediate beginner poses is called star. And when you jump up, you're basically upside down in a headstand, but like the person's feet that's facing you is on your shoulders. And so that's where I noticed that sometimes if I'm not setting myself up for success before an acro jam, depending on who I'm playing with, then that's where I will get some very tiny pimples once in a while now. But that really helped me. It was like, okay, I want to set myself up to enjoy this time and not feel feel attacked or feel gross by people's body parts touching me in these interesting ways that are way different than normal life. And so because I knew that this was a space where this would come up for me more easily, I really tried to just remind myself beforehand and consciously take time before going into the acro space so that I was less likely to have the conflict. And that's something that can be really helpful, or even like with family. Last time I noticed this for myself personally, I was visiting family in Arizona back in 2021, and the family I was staying with are what's the best word to describe it? Just very unaware and just living in their own world and not realizing how they talk affects other people. And I don't think it's necessarily like purposely rude, but just a lot of conversations where I felt attacked or I felt like they didn't understand me, or and 3 years ago, like like I've been an adult with these people, but because they're older and they it was like I just felt like they were treating me like a child. And constantly getting, like, I felt attacked, like, oh, why are you gonna like work on your laptop in the hot tub? Oh, you're taking a bath in the middle of the day. Like, oh, why are you going to do this? Like, it was just constantly questioning me, not understanding me, and having very difficult conversations with these people. And it was just yeah, I haven't stayed with them again because it was just like, okay, this is not a good place for me to spend my time. But I noticed a couple days after I left their house, and I was staying in near Big Bend, because this was on my way to move to Austin, and I had been at their house for like 10 days, and I knew it was wearing on me a little bit, but then when I had a couple days break, I had this massive breakout on my chest and my neck. A bunch of small pimples, and it lasted for like a couple days, and then like they all kind of went away. But I was like, huh, yeah, I guess I did feel attacked a lot with these particular people. And I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? And so, I think with any of these programs, there's a combination of perceptual and practical resolutions, right? Because
Sure.
if you're constantly in environments where just the nature of who you're around, people are sarcastic or verbally attacking people, or like, just how people are, and then you're primed for this conflict, it can be a bit challenging to work through that while still being in that environment. But then also, as you resolve this, right, you become a person that stuff doesn't bother you. Like water off a duck's back, right? It just rolls off of you, and it's like, okay, whatever. This is about them. This is not about me. And I think, if you're someone listening that has been struggling with this for a long time, or it's really intense, taking a break, if you can, from some of those people or environments while you work on the perceptual changes and resolution in your head can help you to then be around those people or situations or environments where maybe those other people haven't really changed, but because you have, it's not affecting you as much, or at all, depending on kind of what layers you've worked through. And so that can be really helpful in downgrading and resolving this, like, overall. Yeah.
And for pretty much any symptom, I always like to ask the question, um, what would I have to change about who I am and how I'm perceiving the world around me in order to no longer even be eligible to experience this type of conflict? So think about, what Ashley was just saying, but think about if a person on the street came up to you and they said, "Oh, you're so purple." And they meant it as like an insult or something. Your skin is so purple. Wow, you're so ugly because your skin's so purple or whatever, right? Totally ludicrous. Like you would think, "Oh, wow, they're clearly on something," and you would just kind of laugh and think like, "Wow, here's this, crazy person like rambling on," like that would not give you an attack conflict, most
Yep.
likely, because there's no part of what they're saying that holds truth for you. So I firmly believe that if you experience an attack conflict, like for example, with Ashley's family that she was staying with, and they made a comment about her, like, what was it, you like being in the water in the middle of the day or
Yeah,
something?
well, because it's family that they don't know how to, they don't really do self-care. They think it's stupid or like it's just all about working hard.
Right.
And
Well,
I
if you're
was,
an entrepreneur, of course, you have
yeah,
different working
yeah,
hours, right? So you can do that kind of thing during the
yeah,
day. But in your perception, if there was some element of that like there's this belief you have about yourself that, like, oh, am I lazy? Right. Or like, oh, like, am I that? Like, if there's some little teensy part of it that consciously you're like, oh, they're crazy. That's not true. But subconsciously,
yep,
if there's a little bit of that's little bit of that's true for you, boom, that can definitely be a conflict. So I think that that's another, like, of course, practical solution here. If being around certain people, like, I don't know, your some family members, right? If they provide this conflict content, right? Or the
hmm,
conflict event in which you tend to experience like attack conflicts or feeling soiled conflicts in relation to what they're saying, then of course, one solution is to remove yourself from that setting and to not spend as much time around those people. However, to access your greatest personal freedom in this, you have to look at, okay, how is what they're saying? Why is that so triggering to me?
right,
What little bit of what they're saying might hold some truth for me, even if this is subconscious, because usually it reflects some of our deepest beliefs and fears and things that we're afraid might be true about ourselves that we don't want to be. So I think that that's another big thing to take a look at, is what element of truth is there, in that for me. And then also going back to different types of practical resolution ideas. And well, I'm going to share some common tracks with acne in particular. So think about, especially teenagers or really any age person that's on social media, and think about the comment section, right? People commenting on your stuff, that might be kind of mean or nasty, or
yeah.
how is what they're commenting. And this is something I've had to look at in myself too. Um, Although I might experience it as more of a self-devaluation conflict, but people can certainly experience this as an attack conflict. But how did that email I got or that comment on social media that I got, or whatever, someone not liking my post or something, how am I perceiving that as an attack conflict? So a practical resolution to that would be, I don't know, deleting social media, right? Or turning off your comment section. Those are two ideas. Also, a lot of people tend to have something like maybe seed oils be a track, or different kinds of greasy,
Foods,
dirty
yeah,
foods, right? Or just processed foods. And so if someone, particularly if they're, if they've been indoctrinated by the holistic realm and they go to eat something with seed oils, they can definitely have a breakout, of acne or, whatever, because they're experiencing that food as soiling them, as dirtying them. And
yep.
that's gross to them. Or even if they look at like the ingredients of something, oh, it has red dye 40 in it. Gross. That's going to like soil my body, right? That's full of carcinogens or, whatever. Can you see how the beliefs about, and I'm not saying that those foods are like maybe the greatest to support our overall health and resiliency, but can you see how some people that say deal with cyclical attack feeling soiled conflicts and have the symptom of acne, chronic acne, could associate those foods with breakouts, and therefore that food or type of foods becomes a track.
Yeah.
Same thing with Ashley mentioned this, touching your face, right? If you have the belief from, the conventional or holistic realm that touching your face
Or your
puts
family.
or your family, right? But that's coming from either
Yeah, yeah,
conventional
yeah.
medicine or
Yeah.
the holistic medicine world that, oh, it's all the nasty bacteria, right? On my hands from the stuff I'm touching. And then I spread the bacteria around on my face. Or if I pop a pimple, I'm spreading bacteria. So that can become a track. And for Ashley, that was a track, the touching her face. And another really big one is looking in the mirror. So if you
Yep.
deal with chronic acne, you're probably looking in the mirror every day, right? And that is a huge source of, obviously recurring conflicts or is a track, so looking in the mirror can definitely be a track. And so if I have a client that's dealing with acne, one of the first things that I tell them, and they think I'm crazy, I'm like, cover up all the mirrors in your house. You're not
Yep.
allowed to look in your mirror. And Dr. Hammer, actually, his classic cure for acne for teenagers specifically, was to take them out in the woods on a camping trip for 2 weeks, where they do not have any access to mirrors. And I suppose
Unless they're me.
in today's modern world, that would also include being off their phones for 2 weeks,
Hmm.
right? I bet that would be a huge game changer for many teenagers that have acne if the underlying conflict is in fact about feeling soiled in terms of their appearance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny that you're sharing this because I grew up going backpacking and camping, tent camping, with my family. And because I've had acne since, so basically like age 12 to age 25. And because also my family was a huge track for me and I felt constantly attacked by them. And like I was sharing before, I didn't even usually leave my room without putting makeup on. So even when we were camping, like I don't know if this would have worked for me specifically if I was going camping with my family. Um, but I brought my makeup into the woods
Oh no.
and brought my little like travel mirror and would do my makeup
Mm.
like at the campsite every camping trip. Like and then I remember getting made fun of for that. Which is interesting because then I feel like I probably would have felt attacked from if I wasn't wearing makeup and they made comments about my skin. So it kind of
Sure.
felt like a no-win situation or lose-lose.
Mm.
But actually that is something I did, which wasn't even a recommendation from my coach, but I covered up my mirrors in my bathroom in particular with Christmas wrapping paper.
Yeah.
Um and like once I learned German medicine. But yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense because then you're not catching yourself randomly or spotting yourself in the mirror and like then that is like an unexpected shock of like, oh, seeing
Mm.
yourself. So I still had like a separate mirror, but it was like in my bathroom vanity in the drawer that I would take out and use at a specific time instead of just having the mirrors always there for me to like catch a reflection of myself. Um, but mirrors used to be a really big track for me. Even and then especially when I worked as a nurse, I I remember carrying my little concealer like stick thing in my scrubs pocket all the time. And every time I'd go to the bathroom, or sometimes I'd go to the bathroom not because I needed to use the bathroom, but because I needed to check my skin, check my face. And the mirror for me was a trigger or like an opportunity to what's wrong with my face.
Mm.
And that was my interaction with the mirror for a long time. And it was hard for me to not use it for that. And so actually covering the mirrors, especially in my apartment, um, and then starting to change my internal dialogue with how I looked in my skin. But but yeah, I mean the mirror was always a reason to find something wrong with my skin, with my face. And yeah, so I was constantly reinforcing the pattern by checking it obsessively. And I'm in general, I'm not like a neurotic person about most things, but I was very neurotic about that. And it was, it's not good. And so, but yeah, but that covering the mirrors. And then when I would use a mirror at home, I would kind of, right, kind of similar to what I was saying about acro yoga, I kind of would use it as an opportunity to set myself up for, okay, it's okay if there's pimples there. Like I'm okay, and not to immediately devalue myself or feel gross or attacked. And
Right.
that made a huge difference because I was doing it consciously and bringing those patterns to my conscious awareness instead of just unconsciously activating this conflict all the time without really being able to see the pattern. And that that changed a lot of things. um and going back to your food comment, um and this is something we've talked about on previous episodes, but it's like if it's really the food, then everyone would have the same symptoms when they eat dairy, when they eat gluten, when they eat pizza.
Right.
And
Totally.
we're not saying that, like, eating healthy, eating a diet that helps you feel nourished, that is going to be overall helpful for maintaining your life and enjoying your life and feeling good in your body.
Sure.
And it's not the
Not the
food.
cause of acne.
No, it's not the cause of acne or any symptom,
Yeah.
but in this episode, acne. And I mean, I ice cream almost every day. Ice cream is like my favorite dessert, and I'll have like a little bit of it. But like I eat ice cream almost every day, and it's great and it's lovely, and I love it so much. And I I used to feel bad about eating desserts, right? For me, it was like more of a sugar thing, like any dessert, like, oh no. Because I had this association in my mind with like, oh, I'm poisoning myself with these sugar molecules and it's not going to be good for my body or my skin. And now I'm like, oh, I really enjoy this. I'm fine. And guess what? I don't have acne. So it's like it's not the food, it's not the ice cream, it's not the gluten, but it is your relationship to it and what's underneath that. Because if it was the food, then every single person would have the same symptom when they ate that food, whatever that food might be. So,
Totally. And they can
and
be
if you,
tracks. Like
yeah, yeah,
that's what we're
yeah,
saying. It's not just that you believe that the food's dirty.
right.
That can definitely be the case, and it can get tracked in that way based on your beliefs about the poor clogging skincare ingredients or whatever it is, or the seed oils in your food, right? But it can also be that a substance or a food or literally anything, looking in the mirror, a thought that pops into your head about, ew, gross. These are all examples of tracks. And for something to get tracked in, it would have been present when you initially experienced the conflict shock. So
Yep.
go to our episode on tracks if you're at all confused about any of this, and we explain it really well, I promise. But then also, what I'm talking about with like the more the thoughts and beliefs about the foods and the skincare ingredients and or products or whatever, that often gets tracked in as a secondary track would be what we
Yep.
call it. So
Yeah.
anyway, if you want to dive deeper into that, go to, I think it's our episode number 8, where we talk about tracks and hanging healings. So that would be a great episode to watch in conjunction with this one if you deal with chronic acne. Um, But just kind of wrapping up, is there anything else you want to add on the topic of acne, Ashley?
I think we basically covered it. I guess to wrap up, yeah, if you're someone listening or sending this episode to someone that has acne, like just let me be an example that you can resolve this and you don't have to deal with this forever.
Yeah.
And in this process, you really get to know yourself. And so like let the opportunity of seeing the patterns be fun and become more curious about what's happening instead of using every time you have a breakout to feel bad or devalue yourself. Like, how can you shift your perspective to celebration and curiosity and just have more fun with it? And like, oh, this is an opportunity to see what my psyche is doing and how can I continue to do that? So then eventually the pattern just it just falls away.
Totally.
And you don't have to restrict your whole life or your food or be on all these expensive supplements or diets or things that bleach your towels and your sheets. Like, and yeah, I think all of these, there's a lot of things you can do to help yourself. And ultimately the best thing you can do is to perceptually see it differently and become curious. So
Absolutely. Well, thanks for listening, guys. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We appreciate you being here.
If you would like some additional support in navigating your health symptoms, we both provide coaching services from a German New Medicine perspective.
Our Instagram handles and personal websites are linked in the podcast description.